sun beat down mercilessly on the vast African wilderness. Heat shimmered off the dry ground. And the silence of the bush was deceptive, pregnant with unseen eyes and hidden dangers. Daniel Carter, 34, wandered alone, his face lined with dust and fatigue. A seasoned travel photographer, he had ventured into the Kalahari Reserve for a solo expedition, chasing the perfect shot, but somewhere along the winding trails, his GPS had failed. His radio went silent, and his supplies, planned for 3 days, were gone by the 5th. He hadn't seen another soul in over 48 hours. No food, no signal, no way to call for help. Each hour dragged like a day. The scrubland blurred into sameness, red dirt, sparse trees, rocks. At night, the temperature dropped sharply. During the day, the heat clawed at him, drying out every breath. And then, things got worse. A deep, guttural growl shattered the quiet. It wasn't close, but it was close enough. Daniel froze. Another growl answered, then another. He knew the sound. Lions. A pride. And judging by the noise, they were surrounding him, not curious, not lazy, hunting. He moved slowly, careful not to panic, but every step crunched loudly on the dry grass. The wind shifted. He knew the moment they caught his scent. The brush rustled. 2 eyes blinked from the tall grass. Then 4, then more. Daniel's heart hammered. He backed away, slowly, mechanically, trying not to trigger a chase. But there was nowhere to go. No tree strong enough to climb. No rocks to hide behind. No chance of outrunning them. And then, he remembered something. 3 years ago, on assignment in Botswana, he had spent weeks documenting a conservation program. One of the researchers had taught him a trick. More of a local myth than a strategy. It seemed absurd at the time. But absurd was better than dead. With shaking hands, he reached into his bag. One item remained. A small canvas pouch, decorative, beaded. Inside, dried herbs, bark, and a tuft of fur. A traditional charm, given to him by a sand tracker. With the words, "Not for luck, for respect." Daniel didn't believe in magic, but he believed in survival. He pulled it out, held it high, and began to speak, not in English, but in the broken dialect he had picked up years ago. Loud, calm, rhythmic. The lions didn't charge. They didn't scatter, either, but they paused, watching, listening, and in that pause, Daniel took one step back. Then another. His eyes never left theirs. The bush stayed still. He kept walking, and the charm swayed gently in his hand, 3 years old. Almost forgotten, until today. 3 years earlier, Daniel's boots crunched softly on the earth as he followed the faint trail through the reserve. He wasn't a tourist then. He was a volunteer with a wildlife conservation group in Botswana, documenting their efforts and lending a hand where he could. That morning, a report had come in. A trap was found near a poacher's path. Likely illegal, dangerous, and still active. Daniel joined a local vet, Dr. Sefu, to investigate. The air was tense. And then, there it was. The sound that froze them both. A whimper, soft but strained, not human. They approached carefully, pushing through the brush. There, tangled in fear and pain, was a lion cub, maybe 6 months old. Its paw was caught in a steel jaw trap, blood soaking the fur, eyes wide with agony. It didn't growl or fight. It was exhausted, quick, Dr. Sefu whispered. Daniel dropped his camera and got on his knees beside the cub. It flinched, but couldn't move. Dr. Sefu sedated it gently, then worked fast to open the trap. The metal gave a sharp snap as it loosened. Daniel held the cub steady, hands trembling. He had never been this close to a lion before, not without a zoom lens. But up close, this wasn't a fearsome predator. This was a baby, hurt, terrified, trusting them because it had no other choice. The wound was deep, bone visible, infection possible. They carried the cub back to the mobile clinic. For days, Daniel stayed close, helping clean the wound, change bandages, feed it, calm it when it cried in the night. He even gave it a name, Tao, meaning lion in Setswana. He learned its quirks, how it growled in its sleep, how it tilted its head when confused, how its eyes followed him across the room. Slowly, Tao's strength returned. The paw would never be perfect, but it would heal enough for life in the wild. A week later, it was time. At dawn, they drove deep into the bush and opened the cage door. Tao stepped out slowly, limping, but free. He turned to Daniel one last time. Their eyes met, and for several long seconds, the cub just stared, not scared, not hurried, just watching, like it was memorizing his face. Then it turned and disappeared into the wild. It was a moment Daniel never forgot. He hadn't told many people. To most, it was just a feel-good story buried under old photos. But standing here now, surrounded by lions, clutching a charm given to him during that same trip, he realized what he gave back then might just be what saves him now. The air was thick, hot, still, electric. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears, drowning out everything but instinct. He could feel them before he saw them, shadows shifting in the tall grass. Muscles coiled and silent. Then he looked up. They were there. 5, maybe 6 lions. Circling, not charging, not yet, just moving in, step by step. Their golden eyes locked on him like lasers. One large male with a dark mane stood directly in front. Eyes narrowed, tail twitching low. A lioness flanked the side, her paws soundless on the earth. Daniel didn't move, couldn't. His breath came shallow. Running was suicide. Screaming, pointless. He had no knife, no flare, nothing but a canvas pouch in his hand and a prayer forming in the back of his throat. This is it, he thought. This is how it ends. But something stopped the lions. They weren't charging, they were watching, closer now. But still, hesitant. The air between them was taut like wire. Then the lead lion took one more step forward. And for the first time, Daniel saw something in its eyes that didn't fit the picture of a hunter. It wasn't hunger. It was recognition. The lion tilted its head slightly. Its nose twitched. And it didn't roar, it sniffed. Daniel blinked, heart hammering. Something about the way it moved. The slight limp in its left forepaw. It hit him like lightning. The scar, just above the paw, the same one Tao had. No way, Daniel whispered, almost laughing from the madness of it. It can't be. But it could. He raised the charm slowly, gently, letting it sway. His other hand stayed open, palms exposed. No threat, no fear, at least none he showed. The lion took another step. Slow and deliberate. The others held back. Now they were eye to eye. And just like 3 years ago, the lion stared at him. Long and hard. Seconds felt like hours. Then, without warning, it turned away. One by one, the others followed. Not a growl, not a scratch, just silence. As they melted back into the bush like smoke, Daniel stayed frozen for a full minute, unable to breathe. Then he dropped to his knees. Not from fear, but from relief so overwhelming it crushed him. He was still alive. Somehow, against all logic, all odds. Something he had done years ago, an act of compassion, had just rewritten the rules of survival. And for the first time in days, he allowed himself a shaky smile. He wasn't out yet, but now, he had a chance. Just as Daniel thought it was over, just as his knees touched the ground and the tension in his chest began to ease, a new sound rippled through the air. Soft, heavy, purposeful. A single lioness stepped out from behind the acacia trees. Larger than the others, muscular, majestic. Her coat glowed in the fading light, and every movement spoke of quiet authority. The other lions stopped and turned toward her immediately, as if giving way. She didn't growl, didn't pounce. She just walked forward, head low, eyes fixed on him. Daniel slowly rose to his feet again. His breath caught somewhere between panic and awe. She circled him once. Close. Too close. He could feel the heat of her body. The quiet pressure in the air. Every nerve in him was screaming to move. To run, but he didn't. She paused behind him, then came around again. Closer. Her nose lifted slightly. She sniffed him. One long breath in. Then she stepped back, and for the first time, their eyes locked, truly locked. Something ancient stirred in Daniel's memory. Not just fear, not wonder, something familiar. A scar ran along the lioness's front leg, jagged, but healed. It ran in the exact same place as the cub's injury. The same leg he had wrapped with gauze, cleaned with trembling hands. Held for days. His breath hitched. It was her. Tao, he whispered, barely audible. The lioness blinked slowly. She took one more step forward, face inches from his, and looked at him with something that defied all logic, calm. Not curiosity, not hunger, recognition. 3 years had turned the frightened cub into a powerful lioness, the leader of her pride. And somehow, through scent, sound, or some unspoken instinct, she remembered him. Daniel's eyes stung. She let out a soft huff. Not a growl, more like an exhale. And then, just like that, she turned and walked away. No drama, no fight, no blood, just grace. The others followed, silently falling in behind her. The bush swallowed them once more. All that was left was the quiet rustle of leaves, the faint echo of paws in the dirt, and Daniel standing alone in the stillness of the African wild. But he wasn't the same man who had walked into it. He had come looking for a photograph. He had found something else entirely. A second chance. A living connection between two moments in time, one of mercy, one of survival, and above all, the proof that sometimes, what we give to the wild, doesn't vanish. Sometimes, it remembers. The radio crackled back to life just before sunset. A team of rangers had been tracking Daniel's last known location. When his signal finally pinged back, they rushed toward it, expecting the worst. What they found stunned them into silence. High on a ridge, cameras mounted discreetly around the reserve captured the final moments of a story no one would have believed without seeing it. The lioness, Tao, stood between Daniel and the rest of the pride. When one of the younger males moved too close, she let out a low, Warning growl. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. The lions stopped, hesitated, then slowly turned away, vanishing into the long grass without protest. And then, the impossible happened. Tao didn't follow them. She stayed, side by side with Daniel. She began walking. She didn't rush. She didn't lead. She walked beside him, close, steady, her presence both powerful and calm. They moved together through the bush for nearly an hour. Daniel stumbled at times, dehydrated and weak, but Tao stayed near, glancing back every few steps, as if checking to see that he was still upright, still alive. Eventually, they reached a clearing near the reserve outpost. The sound of an engine rumbled in the distance. The rangers were getting closer. Tao stopped. She turned to face Daniel one last time. There was no roar, no fanfare, just a long, quiet look, a farewell, and then she walked back into the wild, disappearing with the same silence she had arrived in. Daniel collapsed into the arms of the rescue team, still clutching the small charm in his hand, eyes wet with exhaustion, and something else. Something deeper. Gratitude. Awe. A kind of reverence that words couldn't hold. Later, when the footage was reviewed and broadcast across conservation channels, even the skeptics went quiet. Wildlife experts called it unprecedented. Others simply called it a miracle. But to Daniel, it was something else. It was connection. A memory returned. A life remembered. A debt repaid. He never saw Tao again. But sometimes, in dreams, he swore he heard that soft huff of breath, felt the weight of her gaze. And he knew, the wild had not only forgiven him, it had protected him. Not out of instinct, out of memory, out of something dangerously close to love. And for the rest of his life, whenever someone asked why he still wore that worn-out pouch around his neck, he'd smile and say, "She remembered." Because deep down, he knew the truth. When we treat the wild with care, with kindness, it doesn't forget. It finds a way to return the favor.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.